Hi there. I guess you could say I'm writing this as a cautionary tale for those who plan to study abroad in the future. I do not mean to discourage you from going in the first place. It's more like I just want you to be aware of this, so something like so this doesn't happen to you. I guess I should explain a little bit. I was selected to participate in a study abroad program that would be centered in Rome for several months. Like anyone would be, I was elated. I had never been out of the States before, so this was going to be a real adventure for me. In the weeks that followed, I happily packed everything and anything I could put in my suitcase. I'll be the first to admit that I had whatever packed for this trip. I was nervous about leaving my parents for the first time. I was also excited for the newfound freedom I would have while in Europe. Before I knew it, my parents were dropping me off at the airport. I was boarding the 19-hour flight to Rome. Despite being long and tedious, the flight wasn't all that bad. When I exited the airport, I was greeted by the program supervisor and several other students who would be studying with me. They were about the same age, all looked just exactly as me. From there we went to our mandatory orientated meeting, and afterwards we went to pick up our apartment keys. In the months that preceded the trip, we were responsible for getting to know our would-be roommates, and well as finding a place to stay that we all could afford. There were 3 girls I would be staying with. They were all nice though, and made an effort to make me feel welcome. Though I would admit it was a bit hard to get close to the group of reformed friends. But despite my slight alienation, it seemed that things were all going to work out well. All of us were in a similar budget plan. And by that I mean none of us really had much money to spend. In the same page while searching for the cheapest apartment we could find. After several days of searching, we stumbled across an ad for an ancient apartment located above the Campo di Fiori. It was a premier location where we couldn't believe that it was still available. No less listed for an unbelievably low price. This immediately sent alarm bells off in my head. The space was enormous, yet the rent was cheap, and much smaller apartments and fare less despite the part of the town. Never really wins out of the group of excited young women. They had already made up their minds, and they would be staying with them. This was my only option. We each received our own set of keys, as well as a map with walking directions. Because of the primary location, it really didn't take us long to get out of there. The Campo was amazing. During the daytime, it was filled with vibrant markets, while during the evening it was lined with lovely street performers. All of the apartments surrounding looked to be ancient, so ours really didn't stand out that much. After circling the square for three or four times, we finally noticed a number of nailed front of the massive old door. This will be our home for the next month. I thought with my keys for a moment until there was an audible click in a heavy old lock. The thick door swung forward with a screech. We then met with a long winding staircase. We all looked at one another and groaned. None of us had accounted the fact that the building had been constructed before the elevators were common. So 3 sets of stairs and countless complaints later, all 4 of us were, with luggage in hand, stood outside with our new front door. Once again I reached my own set of keys and fraught with the stubborn look. As soon as the front door opened, there was a stampede of young women trying to claim the best rooms. Being a 3-bedroom apartment, it meant the 2 of us would have to share. I personally didn't really care to let others battle it out. When the dust had settled, I found that it would be a sharing room with a girl called Stephanie. Stephanie was nice enough, and she was also very quiet. My ideal feature in a roommate. Over the course, the rest of the day, we ran out exploring our new home. There were 2 bathrooms, full kitchen, living room with an ancient TV. Once again, I began to feel uneasy. Just how was it that we were able to get all of this for such a low price? The thought I was interrupted by a bit loud squealing. All my initial reaction was to panic. However, as soon as I learnt that it was a noise from the excitement down at the other end of the apartment near the front door. Apparently it was another part of the flat we had missed. I followed the noise until it led me to a long dark hallway. There at the end, behind the group of squealing women, was a washing and drying machine. For those you would think, what's the big deal? Should I explain that these things are incredibly rare in Rome? Generally, exchange students would have to wash their clothes by hand in the sink before hanging them out to dry. What was a luxury item doing in such a cheap apartment? Just as the screaming quelled it picked up again as the girls noticed an agent to the washing machine. Beyond that there was a massive bathroom. It had a balcony, a clawfoot tub, and even a bidet. The girls who immediately started to fight over whose bathroom was going to be. I didn't really see why they couldn't share, but apparently the others were dead set of having ownership. As it turned out, ending up being my bathroom. Stephanie had made a logical agreement that because she and I had to share a bedroom, while the other two each got their own room, it was only fair that she and I got to share a massive bath. And I had to admit that at first I was actually kind of excited. It was after all a really nice room. However, over the course of the next several weeks I began to grow more and more aware of my room. I don't know how to put it into words. It was like every time I went into the room I could feel something's eyes on me. And the voyeuristic element wasn't really what had me unnerved. I felt like whatever it was watching me was angry, that it didn't want me there, and it wanted to hurt me. I began doing everything in my power to avoid the room. I asked Alicia if she would mind if we could use her restroom occasionally. I made a lame excuse about how it was far more convenient since her room was so close to while my bathroom was at the other end of the flat, at the end of a very long hallway. She happily agreed though. When I told her that she could use my bathroom anytime she liked, this worked out well for a while. About the first 2 months of our trip, I was able to completely avoid Irene's room. It wasn't until the final month that everything began to unravel. One night I prepared to brush my teeth. I found that Alicia was already occupying her bathroom. I could hear giggles coming from down the hallway. It was clear that Stephanie and our roommate were both getting ready for bed in the massive bath. I decided that since there was strength in numbers, so I made my way down the large bedroom, had broken into such a furious fit of laughter that she had to lean on the wall for support. But suddenly she jolted right up and she had been shot. We all looked at what had been a cause of her reaction. There on the wall, about the same level as the bathroom, the tiny door. None of us had noticed it because it was the same as the colour as the walls. The landlord had never painted over it. Naturally, this made me a bit nervous. Wherever it was, the landlord clearly didn't want anybody to open it. But as usual, throwing all caution into the wind, Lindsay reached for the handle and began tugging with all her might. Stephanie clucked at her tongue, disapproval, before pulling out a small pocket knife. She began delicately to carve along the seam of the door. I wanted to beg her to stop, but really didn't have any energy to argue that night. So within a few minutes, Lindsay had yanked the little door open with a loud crack. It was a crawl space. Fairly large. My guess would have been that you could have fit at least 3 or 4 people in there. It was rather curious as to why the landlord would have sealed it up empty little room. When I thought about it, Stephanie and Lindsay began calling Aisha to come and see their new discovery. She was just as excited as they were when they first discovered it. However, as could have been expected, the excitement was wanted over eventually the crawl space was just turned into a storage for a few towels and laundry basket. In the following days of unsealing the crawl space, they started to go from downright terrifying. Annoyingly, Alicia had changed her nightly routine so that she could no longer use her bathroom in the evenings. Once again, I was back in the large room. The feeling that I was being watched growing worse and worse. I began to get paranoid each time I went to the room, that I would literally jump out at the slightest noise of the pipe in the ceiling. As soon as I was finished, I would run at full speed down the hallway and close the door behind me. For some reason, I seemed to have been the only one feeling this way. It's not like I could have told the other girls either. I was already enough of an outcast as it was. So I just kept it to myself and hoped it would go away eventually. Unfortunately, it wasn't the case. One night I was getting ready for bed. I found myself alone in the bathroom. As I stood in front of the mirror, brushing my teeth, something set the hairs off my back of my neck slightly up. It was a faint rustling noise, none of the kind that could have been caused by roommates or other ones in the flat. Any noises that by them would have had to have been quite loud to reach me all the way from the end of the long hallway. No, these noises weren't very faint. Not that someone was... The sound of someone generally shuffling things around. I stood completely silent, terror filling me. The soft rustling noise was coming from the inside of the crawl space. I turned my head and ran down the hallway to grab the attention of my roommates. I tried to explain to them what happened. Eventually I managed to stutter. Something's inside the crawl space. They looked with fear, confusing eyes. As the pack we moved in together down the hallway into the bathroom. I nearly fainted when I saw the door hanging full ajar. though this discovery filled me with terror. Alicia immediately pointed to the balcony sliding door. Stephanie had left it open in the air out of the bathroom, having taken a shower several hours ago. She peeked her head out the door, the tainted rooftop adjacent to ours. There were pigeons' nests occupying by a few birds. The girls assumed that the pigeons must have found their way because of the cause of the disturbance. They all had a good laugh as they made their way back to our living room. I pretended to shake it off, but I knew it was not the pigeons that were causing the rustling noise. First off, the tiny door has been shut tight all day. None of us really cared to leave anything open because it smelled quite musty inside. And secondly, the door had been shut when I left the bathroom. I am certain of this. Yet it was wide open when I returned. You're not going to tell me that pigeons know how to and is capable of opening and closing doors by itself. It was the point that I began to suspect that something really terrible wrong with this apartment. When I was going back to my room, I pulled my laptop and called my best friend via Skype. She had always been skeptical and methodological type. She also kept an open mind towards the things that had been heard to explain. I decided that out of anyone's, she would always been skeptical and methodological type. However, she was also kept an open mind towards the things that were hard to explain. I decided that out of anyone, she was probably the best to talk to about my situation. As I expected, she was initially quiet and quite doubtful, though she also agreed with me that the pigeons were quiet. She asked me if I had any photos of the crawl space. She said that if she could see it, that would help her understand a little more clearly, possibly to help her come up with a more logical explanation. Revealed that her willingness, at least she had heard me out. I reached for my camera and made my way back down to the errand hallway. When I arrived, I found, to my relief, that the door was still closed. I stood in front of it for a moment, gathering my nerve before finally pulling the little door open. Despite the cluttering left inside my roommate, it was empty. I snapped a quick photo before closing the door and more running back to my room. I immediately plugged my camera into my computer, uploading the photo. When I finally opened the image, I was petrified of what I saw. On the upper right corner there was a face, baring its teeth at me. My whole body began violently to shake. Dear God, this thing is in our home, I muttered to myself. Fear began to overtake me. Someone had sealed whatever inside that crawl space, and we had let it out. I was so astonished in my panic that I didn't even notice when my roommate returned. She was blissfully unaware that the immediate danger we were in. Yet, even if I tried to warn her, she would not believe me. I was at a loss of what to do. I finally decided it would deal with it in the morning. I did feel braver in the sunlight, for there I attempted to get some sleep. Though for the first time ever since beginning there, I closed the bolted door before getting into bed. Stephanie eyed me suspiciously when doing so. But I just told her jokingly that Lindsay had sneaked into our room previous night and had been stealing my Nutella. She laughed hardly, shaking her hand before settling down at night. I will admit that only reason I was able to find any sleep that night was because of her presence. Something about not being alone can give someone a sense of false security. It was about 2 o'clock in the morning when our sound woke me. I had always been a light sleeper. So the faintest noise was enough to start stirring me. It sounded like the door had been pushed open on the other end of the flat followed footsteps. But they weren't just normal footsteps, they were way too fast. It sounded like someone was running at full speed down the foyer to the living room and all about the apartment, like the kind you would expect from a running person. They were very light, almost unnatural so. My initial reaction was to assume that either Alicia or Lindsay, so I got up and stuck my ear onto the wall behind me, separating Lindsay's room from mine. I could hear her faint but steady breathing. She was clearly asleep, it wasn't her. So then I crossed over to the other side of the room near the door once again and stuck my ear on the wall. Alicia was snoring quite audible. There was no way it was her. Slowly I began to grow fearful as I turned into the last resort to see if Stephanie had perhaps gotten up. But I couldn't plainly see her, resting from the side of the rising up and down. And shiver went down my spine when I nearly screamed when I realised that the footsteps had come into stop outside my door. Despite all lights being out, I could clearly see the looming dark shadow of the tiny crack at the front of the door. I dared not move. Wherever it was just standing there, waiting. Then to my horror, my door knob slowly began to jiggle. Gently at first, but then growing violently as the realization of being locked. The noise of it eventually woke my roommate. She sat up, blinking in confusion. The insist of jiggling the doorknob had stopped. She asked me what the hell just was going on, and if I knew what the time was. I told her it wasn't me, though I told her that wherever it was had opened the door in the crawl space the previous day and come back. She just furrowed her brow at me and said I needed to get more sleep. The next day I made an appointment with the program supervisor. I told him I just need to go home. He tried to tell me that I was just homesick and I would pass, but I insisted. He eventually gave up and let me call my parents. They were confused but understanding. They were able to change my date of return flight the following morning. I really wanted to get out that day, but understandably it was the soonest that could be managed. Unfortunately, this meant I would stay one more night in the apartment. When I returned, I tried to tell the others about what had been going on. I knew it was going to be a getting out of there, and it would be out of danger. But I was still immensely worried at their safety. None of them took me seriously. They looked at me as if I was a mad woman. They didn't say anything, but I was sure going home because of some sort of mental breakdown. At this point, there was nothing that I could say. At this point, there's nothing I could say to convince them. So the night I locked my door, hastily went to bed. When right on cue, once again around 2 o'clock in the morning, I awoke with the rapid footsteps of the scramping around in my apartment. I could hear the door of the bathroom begin to creakle open, followed by the door at the end of the hallway. The footsteps grew louder and faster. They moved through the apartment, and finally, once more, they came to pause at our door, and they could hear someone heavily. I sat up in panic, and to my horror, I saw that Stephanie had forgotten to lock the door behind her after getting in the room. It was right outside my door, and I didn't know if I had time to jump and try to lock it before I realised there was nothing blocking its way. Hence, at a moment too long, it was right outside my door, and I didn't know if I had time to jump up and try to lock the door before the thing realised there was nothing blocking its way. I hesitated a moment too long, and the time had sat up. Straight out of my bed, handling slowly began to turn. I froze in terror as the door crackled open, revealing my tormentor. It stood ominously in the doorway, staring at me. Eyes protrude slightly from its skull and gave off a very faint blush of light. It did not appear to have a nose. Only sizable nostrils should have been. It had teeth of a man, but had no lips, giving it the impression that eternally toothly snarl. Its gravish white skin was waxy and stretched tighter over its bronzy face. The rest of the skeleton form was heard of to make out as it's almost eternally enveloped in shadows. After pausing for a moment in the doorway, it began to head towards me. As it moved, the body let out sneaker cracks. I sat there still petrified by fear until it had made its way to the foot of my bed. Its heavy breaths were definitely loud. I don't know if Stephanie had slept through it. The air began to smell sour and stagnant. With frightening speed, it jolted up at the end of my bed, meeting my feet. I gagged at its smell of it. It's like sulphur, rotting flesh. Slowly, not until there was several inches away I did finally find my voice. I screamed as loud as possible. I screamed as loudly as I possibly could, and it halted at its track. Stephanie stood up from its bed, visibly frightened. The creature had hinged over on all fours and fled out from the room with unsettling movements reaching those of a spider. 1 moment later, Stephanie switched the light on and looked at me furiously. She demanded to know what the fuss was all about. I told her exactly what happened, but she just called me a nutcase. The taxi came to pick me up the very next morning. The sun had not even risen by the time it arrived. None of the girls came to see me off, but as I expected this. After loading my luggage into the truck, I climbed in the back of the seat of the old cab, and it's driven right through the square as I was sitting at the base of my apartment. When I learned to look out the window, I could see where my room had been. My face clotted into a mixture of panic and concern. There, looking at me out the window, was the creature. Its unblinking eyes bored into me, and its mouth were cluttered into a snarling grin. Before I could say anything, the cab driver had taken me off, leaving the hell house far behind. I tried to warn them, I really did. I did everything in my power to try to warn them of the danger they were in, but none of them listened to me. There was no way I could have stopped what had happened after I returned home. You see, several weeks after returning to the United States, I received a phone call from the program director. He informed me that the day before the program ending, all 3 of the past roommates had been reported missing. The authors had no idea how long they could actually been gone for, as they were the only recent discovery missing when the program director went to check on them after none of them made it to the end of the program warm-up meeting. They assumed it had been the last week or two. Since all the food in the apartment was expired, there was no slightly force of entry, and no valuables missing. Only notable detail mentioned in the report that they arrived in the scene. Their strange little door hanging ajar in the bathroom, and when they approached it, they met with a powerful odour coming from a non-visible source. The official reporter of them declared them as missing, but I know they're all dead. I know that I'm incredibly lucky to have made it out of my life, but I think the only reason I'm still alive today is because I've fled thousands of miles across the ocean. Despite their unwillingness to listen, I still feel an unimaginable amount of guilt for what happened to those girls. That's why I'm writing this now. I may not be able to go back to save them, but I may be able to prevent the case happens to you. Please, please, hear my warning. If you ever get the opportunity to study abroad, keep this in mind. If they seem to have good to be true, it probably is. And whatever you do, stay away from the 3rd floor of the ancient yellow apartment complex, Campo de Flor. Something's there, something's evil.